On a windy March morning in 2003, at the grain elevator outside Concordia, Bo Ramsey stepped out of a 1994 Ford F-250 that looked ready for salvage and moved like a man reporting for ordinary works. The truck had 312,000 miles, rust through both rocker panels, and a tailgate held level by baling wire and habit. His cap was sun-faded to a color between gray and dust. His overalls had 2 stitched knee patches and 1 square patch at the right hip. He carried a thermos with a cracked lid and a folded scale ticket in his shirt pocket. 3 men near the office window paused their conversation when they saw him. One of them, a dealership representative from Hutchinson named Trent Halverson, stood in polished boots, pressed pearl snap shirt, clean denim, and the confidence of a person who sold new things on monthly payments. He looked at Bo, then at the truck, then back at Bo with a half-smile that had already reached a conclusion. The judgment was easy to make and mostly wrong. Bo looked like a farmer who had stayed too long in a bad year. He was 58, lean from work, and frugal in ways that were visible from 50 yards away. What no one could see from the parking lot was that he controlled 640 acres across Cloud County and Reno County, with senior water rights tied to older adjudications near Concordia and Hutchinson. Positions filed and maintained before newer claimants had even entered the ground game. Neighbors who financed expansion at 7.8%, then refinanced at 8.6%, then rolled operating notes near 9.4%, called him stuck in the past. They had no window into his ledger. They saw deferred paint, not deferred risk. They saw patched overalls, not paid-off acreage. Bo did not arrive at that posture by temperament alone. In 1981, when rates climbed and lines of credit tightened across the region, he was standing beside his father at a county auction where 47 lots were sold in 4 hours and a family operation disappeared 1 bid at a time. His father had carried variable debt that looked manageable at 6.5% and became crushing when repriced above 14%. A note that had cost roughly $1,950 a month moved past $3,400. Grain prices did not rise in sympathy. Their lender was not cruel. Their arithmetic was. Bo did not inherit much after the dust settled. An old toolbox, a set of irrigation maps, and enough bitterness in the community to fill a silo. He kept one memory clean and sharp. Debt looked useful right up to the week it did not. By harvest 1984, he was renting 120 acres on a crop share arrangement, running a used International Harvester 1086 he bought for $8,900 cash and repaired with $1,140 in parts spread over 2 winters. The engine smoked on cold starts and leaked from a gasket he resealed himself. He tracked every expense in composition notebooks, then copied totals into hardbound ledgers each December. He refused the long-term financing even when neighbors called that refusal naive. Instead, he built a sequence. 1986, bought 40 acres with a weak well for $22,400 cash after 2 years of savings and a private note paid in 18 months. 1989, purchased first senior position water parcel, 80 acres, $46,000 cash, at an estate sale where larger bidders ignored low-producing ground. 1992, acquired an additional 120 acres in Reno County for $78,000, paid with retained earnings and no bank term debt. 1997, added 160 acres near an older conveyance line, $84,000, closing costs paid at signing. 2001, secured final 240 acres through two separate transactions, totaling $81,600 after a dry cycle softened land demand. By 2004, he had assembled the core 640 acres and the right kind of water paper, spending $312,000 in acquisition costs over 15 years, not in one dramatic move, but in patient increments. His children grew up inside that rhythm and misunderstood it for a long time. Wade, the oldest, measured progress in horsepower and acres planted. Lila measured it in credentials and options beyond the county line. Ben measured it in herd size and feedlot capacity. All three worked hard. All three loved their father. All three heard the same instruction at planting, at first cutting, at tax time, and at Christmas when the ledger came out beside the pie plates. Never sell the water rights. Bo never raised his voice when he said it. He spoke as if reminding them to close a gate before a storm. Wade once asked him why he would keep old pivots when a modern finance system could increase uniformity. Bo answered in 11 words. Uniformity on debt can still break you in a dry year. Lila asked why he still wore patched overalls when he could afford better. He answered in 7. Cloth does not grow bushels. Cash reserves do. Ben asked why every major purchase required waiting. Bo answered in 5. Waiting costs less than interest. By the second week of October 2004, the contrast between Bo and his peers had become a local pattern people discussed at parts counters and church suppers. Some neighbors expanded aggressively with dealer financing that bundled tractors, planters, and service contracts into clean monthly numbers. A typical package in those years might run $410,000 at 8.2% over 7 years, near $6,390 monthly before fuel, labor, insurance, or repairs. Bo ran older, paid for equipment, and accepted uneven cosmetics in exchange for low fixed costs. His combine was a John Deere 7720 bought at auction for $14,700, then overhauled for $6,200 across 2 off-seasons. A comparable, newer financed unit would have required annual payments above $48,000. Bo spent the difference on things other people could not see. Prepaid fertilizer when winter pricing dipped 11%, discounted diesel contracts when suppliers needed cash flow, and legal maintenance on water documentation that younger operators treated as paperwork until drought cycles made paperwork into power. He also built discipline into the household budget with precision that looked almost severe from the outside. Annual personal spending for the farmhouse and family basics averaged $27,400 between 1998 and 2004, food $7,100, utilities $4,860, property tax and insurance $6,940, clothing $620, truck maintenance $1,280, church and local giving $2,000, miscellaneous and medical cash reserves $4,600, no boat payment, no recreational land note, no vacation financed after harvest. When the Ford needed transmission work in 2002, he spent $1,950 on rebuild rather than replacing it with a $31,000 finance pickup. Neighbors joked that he could buy a new truck if he sold one tired quarter. He would smile and keep loading feed. Early spring in 2005 brought the kind of invitation that turns private philosophy into public conflict. At a cooperative breakfast in Hutchinson, Trent Halverson sat down with Wade, Lila, and Ben before Bo reached the table and laid out a polished argument with polished numbers. Permanent transfer package, one payment, $1,200,000. He framed it as a strategic exit before regulations tightened, before old methods were stranded, before opportunity moved to someone else. Wade was carrying a $186,000 operating note at 9.1%. Lila had $42,000 in education debt. Ben was preparing to open a financed cattle line. Trent looked toward the parking lot at Bo's rusted Ford and said they could clear those burdens immediately if their father would stop farming like it was 1979. Bo sat down, listened without interruption, and declined in 12 words that landed harder than a speech. Sell hay, sell calves, sell land if needed, never water. Then he poured coffee, opened his pocket notebook, and wrote down the date. Trent watched Bo write the date as if that small motion confirmed every stereotype he sold for a living. The broker had a silver watch, a leather portfolio with embossed initials, and a new 3/4-ton pickup outside with temporary tags and a monthly payment that matched some family's rent. Bo had a cracked thermos, a blunt pencil, and a truck door that needed a shoulder to close. The room read those details and drew a fast conclusion. Wade felt it in his jaw. Lila felt it as embarrassment she did not want to admit. Ben kept staring at the baling wire on the tailgate through the diner window, as if that wire had become an argument against his father. Trent slid a single page toward the children. It was clean, bright, and simple on purpose. Offer price, $1,200,000. Estimated closing costs and transfer counsel, $46,800. Estimated combined tax burden at state and federal levels, $303,000. Net after transaction, $850,200. Split 3 ways after reserve, around $270,000 each. You can erase debt in 30 days, he said, tapping the paper. And your father can finally retire with dignity. The word dignity hung there like an accusation aimed at Bo's overalls. Bo folded the page once, set it beside his plate, and said nothing. His silence made Trent talk more, and every extra sentence sounded like certainty wrapped around pressure. By late afternoon, wind had pushed dust against the porch screen at the Ramsey farmhouse, and the same page lay flat on the kitchen table under a mason jar of bolts so it would not curl. Bo asked all 3 children to sit. He did not stand, did not pace, did not perform authority. He opened the first hardbound ledger, then the second, then a third with receipts clipped in rows by year. He turned each one so they could read the entries in his block handwriting. If you want to be angry at numbers, he said. Numbers are fair. They do not flatter anybody. He started with 1981, the year he stopped mistaking credit for capacity. He showed them the copied loan terms from his father's file. Principal $286,000 across land and equipment. Variable rate starting near 6.5%, reset above 14%. Monthly obligation rising from roughly $1,950 to more than $3,400, while wheat and sorghum prices moved the wrong direction. Then he showed the auction totals that followed. Household goods and tools sold for $12,740. 2 tractors and implements sold for $39,300. Stored grain liquidated into a weak market. Net to debt after fees still left a shortfall. Good man. Bad structure, Bo said, and his hand rested on the page for a moment before he turned it. He moved into his own beginning with almost clinical precision, as if he had rehearsed this for years and hoped never to use it. 1984. Gross farm income on rented ground, $63,800. Operating expenses, $41,260. Net before household costs, $22,540. Cash set aside, $12,000. 1985 drought haircut reduced gross to $49,200, but he cut input timing, delayed non-critical repairs, and preserved a $9,700 surplus. 1986 purchase of 40 acres at $22,400 used $17,000 cash and a private balance at 0% for 18 months. Retired early. No bank lien. 1987 and 1988 he added no land, only reserves, because commodity pricing did not justify expansion. By 1989, he had $51,300 liquid and bought that first 80-acre senior position parcel for $46,000 cash, plus $1,300 due $20, filing and adjudication updates. Then he gave them the year-by-year sequence he had never spoken aloud in one sitting. 1990. Net farm income, $38,700. Reserve account, $29,000. 1991. Bought 2 used pumps for $3,600 total. Rebuilt for $940. 1992. Acquired 120 acres in Reno County, $78,000 cash. Ending reserves, $8,400. 1993. Recovered reserves to $24,600 through custom hay and conservative input purchasing. 1994. Bought the Ford for $6,800 cash with 141,000 miles. 1995. Installed conveyance improvements for $11,200 and lifted leasability. 1997. Added 160 acres for $84,000 cash. 1998 through 2000. No land purchases. Reserves climbed from $63,000 to $117,000. 2001. Acquired final 240 acres through 2 deals totaling $81,600. 2002 through 2004. Legal maintenance and meter upgrades cost $27,900. Lease income rose and operating debt remained zero long-term. Lila had expected a defense built from pride. She got a framework built from arithmetic. Wade pointed at the lease column and asked why his father had hidden it. Bo corrected him gently. He had not hidden it, he had separated it. Farm operating decisions stayed with operators. Water paper stayed with ownership because panic in one season should never force liquidation of the underlying advantage. Between 1989 and that night in 2005, lease and transfer shortfall arrangements had generated $486,000 gross and about $401,000 net after maintenance and counsel. Not windfall money, Bo said. Stability money. Before we go any further, if you are the kind of person who wants the ending before the argument is finished, subscribe and stay with this one, because the next numbers explain 20 years of conflict in one family. Ben leaned back and asked the practical question. If we keep everything, how do we pay my expansion and Wade's note and Lila's loans now? Bo did not dodge it. He drew 3 columns. First, Wade's $186,000 operating note at 9.1%. Interest alone near $16,926 per year if carried. Second, Lila's $42,000 education debt. Blended rate 6.4%. Yearly interest about $2,688 before principal reduction. Third, Ben's planned cattle line, projected $240,000 at 8.7%, with annual interest above $20,000 in early years. Combined first-year interest exposure would exceed $39,000, and that was before a dry year, before diesel spikes, before feed volatility. "You are not buying growth," he told them. "You are buying fragility." 3 days later, they drove to a consignment auction outside Hutchinson, and Bo turned theory into routine. He wore the same patched overalls. Trent stood by a row of newer units with two dealer representatives, greeting bidders by first name and talking about tax advantages of financing before year-end. Bo skipped that row and walked to an older line item most people ignored. A used turbine pump assembly from a dissolved partnership, catalog lot 214, with surface rust and uncertain service records. Starting ask was $11,000. Bo had inspected it the day before and priced the risk. He bid to $7,200, stopped, waited, then took it at $7,600 when the room hesitated. Rebuild parts and labor later cost $2,140. Total in service, $9,740. A comparable financed replacement package quoted near $28,400 plus interest and dealer service lock-ins. Difference up front, $18,660. Difference over 5 years with financing, near 8.3%, more than $23,000. That same morning, he bought 2 sections of older, gated pipe for $480 and a gravity feed control unit for $310, all paid in cash, from an envelope he had prepared at sunrise. Wade watched him hand over exact bills and collect handwritten receipts, then watched 3 other bidders sign financing packets for equipment that looked better on day 1 and cost far more by year 7. No one there was foolish. Most were squeezed by timing, weather, and the pressure to keep up with visible standards that lenders and neighbors both rewarded. Bo refused that game because he had seen the end of it at an auction fence in 1981. By the first week of June, Bo had the purchase pump torn down under the machine shed and rebuilt with Ben over 2 long evenings. He measured tolerances with tools older than both sons. He wrote each part number and each dollar amount in the ledger as if record-keeping itself was a form of protection. Wade handled field passes during those evenings and realized the old equipment schedule was less about nostalgia than control. Paid-for machinery could sit when margins were thin. Financed machinery had to run to justify its own payment, even when conditions said, wait. Lila asked one more question at the kitchen table that weekend. Why keep living like this if the numbers were already strong? Bo answered without looking up from the ledger. Fixed personal spending stayed low so business decisions could stay patient. In 2004, his household number had been $27,400. If he had expanded lifestyle to $68,000, the difference, $40,600, would have demanded either higher crop risk or more borrowed money every year. Over 10 years, with modest investment return at 4.5%, that difference compounded past $500,000. Comfort is expensive when it becomes mandatory, he said. I would rather keep it optional. The argument did not disappear that week. It sharpened. Wade still wanted speed. Ben still wanted scale. Lila still wanted freedom from county math and county expectations. Trent kept calling, always polite, always prepared, always ready with a clean one-page solution. But now the children had seen the ledgers, the receipts, the counterfactual columns, and the auction arithmetic in real time. Their father still looked from the road like the poorest operator at the elevator. Rust, patches, old truck, quiet voice. Inside the books was a different reality, one that had taken 20 years to build and one bad signature to erase. Bo closed the ledger, wrote the day's diesel price in the margin, and repeated the rule with no extra flourish at all. Sell hay, sell calves, sell land if needed, never water. No one answered him for several seconds. The kitchen clock ticked loud enough to count. Wade finally reached for the folded offer sheet, read the net line again, and placed it back under the mason jar of bolts. Lila traced the ledger margin where Bo had written the diesel price. Ben looked from one column to another, then asked what happened next if they followed Bo's rules exactly. Bo turned one page and wrote a new heading by hand. Hold water. Grow reserves. Buy only what cash can carry. Then he assigned numbers, not speeches. Wade would keep farming acres already in rotation and cut operating exposure by selling the newer financed header attachment before interest reset. Ben would postpone the cattle expansion line for 2 seasons and build feed inventory with cash purchases in off-peak months. Lila would take part-time bookkeeping for 2 neighboring operations at $14,400 annual gross to accelerate education debt payoff while staying close enough to audit the family records herself. By January 2006, the first measurable effects were already visible in the books. Wade liquidated the financed attachment for $61,000, retired $54,200 of no principal, and saved roughly $4,932 in annual interest at 9.1%. Lila applied $11,000 to her student balance in one payment, reducing principal from $42,000 to $31,000, and shaving about $704 yearly interest at 6.4%. Ben sold 42 head earlier than planned into a favorable local bid, netting $33,600 after costs and setting all of it aside instead of opening his planned credit line. Bo added one line below those entries. Speed feels good. Margin feels better. He did not say it out loud. Then came the stretch where quiet strategy became compounding arithmetic. In 2005, Bo leased 240 acre-feet at $172 per acre-foot, grossing $41,280. After conveyance, council, and maintenance, net was $34,300. In 2006, 255 acre-feet at $184 produced $46,920 gross and $38,450 net. In 2007, 272 acre-feet at $198 produced $53,856 gross and $44,120 net. In 2008, as dry pressure began to widen lease demand, 295 acre-feet at $226 produced $66,670 gross and $55,010 net. In 2009, 308 acre-feet at $244 produced $75,152 gross and $62,630 net. In 2010, 322 acre-feet at $258 produced $83,076 gross and $69,300 net. 6-year lease gross, $366,954. 6-year lease net, $303,810. Every net dollar that did not go to taxes or maintenance was routed into 3 buckets with fixed percentages, Bo set and never adjusted on emotion: 50% liquidity reserves, 30% input prepay opportunities, 20% family debt retirement. The crop side followed the same discipline. On irrigated corn blocks, the family averaged 171 bushels per acre in better years and 154 in weaker years through 2010, with blended sale prices from $3.18 to $4.62 per bushel, depending on contract timing. Bo refused heroic yield spending. He targeted resilient margins. In 2008, instead of financing a new high-clearance sprayer at $189,000, he paid $19,800 cash for a used unit with known wear and budgeted $6,400 for repairs, total $26,200. Financed alternative at 8.4% over 7 years would have pushed total paid near $243,000 with interest and service package. Cash route saved more than $216,000 over life of use, even after extra maintenance. That single decision, repeated in different forms, explained why reserves kept rising when appearances did not change. By the end of 2010, family liquid reserves stood at $1,146,000 across operating and reserve accounts, while long-term debt remained zero. He also formalized the household discipline, so none of the children could accuse him later of selective memory. Annual personal living costs, averaged from 2005 through 2010, were $29,860. Food, $8,000 to $20. Utilities, $5,210. Taxes and insurance, $7,000 to $340. Clothing, $740. Truck and fuel for personal use, $1,680. Medical and contingency, $4,270. Church and community giving, $2,600. That was not deprivation, it was design. If they had allowed lifestyle drift to $72,000 per year, the difference of $42,140 annually over 6 years would have removed $252,840 from reserves before compounding. At 4.5% conservative return, opportunity cost moved beyond $287,000. Bo wrote that number twice in the margin and circled it. It was the cost of trying to look successful to people who never saw the ledger. Let me stop here and ask you something. If one path gives you a newer pickup and applause this season, and the other gives you control when the weather turns against everybody, which one is actually modern? Around Cloud County and Reno County, that question stopped being abstract by the time 2011 arrived. Ethan Mull had done what banks, dealers, and extension meetings had encouraged for years. He was diligent, early to the field, and respected by people who knew his work ethic. Between 2006 and 2010, he expanded to 1,120 acres, financed 2 new center pivots, updated machinery, and consolidated obligations into a package that reached $2,400,000 total exposure. On paper, during strong commodity years, ratios looked manageable. At 7.4% blended borrowing cost, annual debt service already strained operating breathing room. When rates and input costs shifted together, his cushion vanished. Ethan did not fail from laziness. He failed from thin margin stacked under large fixed obligations. Bo never criticized him, never once. When Ethan sold tools at consignment to cover short-term cash calls, Bo bought nothing from his lot out of respect and dropped off parts contacts quietly through Wade. Carla and Jim Dorsey made a different choice under different pressure, and theirs hurt in a slower way. They had $590,000 in notes tied to equipment and land improvements, and in 2012 they accepted a $680,000 permanent transfer for key water rights after legal and tax estimates promised relief. Closing worked exactly as promised at first. Debts were cleared. The mailbox calmed down. But without those rights, well capacity and irrigation flexibility dropped just when dry years deepened. Their yields became more exposed, and land value sensitivity changed because buyers discounted acreage with weaker water position. They stayed kind, worked hard, and tried to adapt. Yet by 2014, they were selling parcels to stabilize cash flow. Nobody in the county who understood the numbers treated them as a cautionary joke. They were decent people who chose certainty in a frightening moment and paid for it later. Miguel Herrera got trapped by the most familiar trap of all, the variable rate ladder that looks harmless until one rung breaks. He rolled equipment debt at 6.9% in 2009, then refinanced portions as terms shifted. And by 2013, his effective rates on some lines reached 11.8%. The principal had not exploded. The price of carrying it had. A combined payment schedule that had begun near $3,100 monthly moved toward $4,450 with rate changes and revised terms. Diesel, fertilizer, and insurance deductibles rose at the same time. Yield shortfalls in dry sections finished the equation. Miguel filed bankruptcy when his operating cycle could no longer absorb fixed obligations. Bo drove to his place with a legal pad, not advice, and helped him list which essential tools could be replaced used for cash, later if he got a second start. By the second week of July 2011, drought was no longer a forecast problem, but a field-level reality across multiple counties. Allocation constraints tightened. Heat stress climbed. Some dry land blocks were cut for salvage earlier than anyone wanted. Crop insurance helped, but deductibles and timing meant many families still carried painful gaps between loss and recovery. Diesel that had sat near $2.87 per gallon in calmer periods pushed past $4 in stretches that mattered. Fertilizer invoices arrived before relief checks. Lenders who had been flexible turned procedural. None of this was dramatic in one day. It was cumulative pressure, month after month, invoice after invoice. Bo's system was built for cumulative pressure. In 2011, he leased 334 acre-feet at $286 per acre-foot. Gross $95,524, net $79,200. In 2012, 340 acre-feet at $318, gross $108,120, net $89,900. In 2013, 336 acre-feet at $352, gross $118,272, net $98,600. In 2014, 328 acre-feet at $410, gross $134,480, net $110,300. 4-year drought period lease net reached $378,000. He used $146,000 of that to eliminate the remainder of Wade's operating exposure, $31,000 to clear Lila's final education balance, and $62,000 to help Ben buy used cattle handling equipment and feed storage in cash rather than debt. The rest fortified reserves and input pre-buys. Zero long-term debt meant no lender could force a distressed asset decision in a bad month. Trent Halverson returned during those same years with higher offers and sharper urgency language. In late 2011, he floated $1,650,000. In 2013, with drought headlines everywhere, he came at $2,200,000 and called permanent transfer, responsible modernization at a county gathering. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He did what professional brokers do, framed liquidity as prudence and legacy assets as idle capital. Because Bo still drove the same faded 1994 Ford and wore the same patched work clothes, Trent's narrative still sounded plausible to people who judged by the parking lot. Wade relapsed into doubt once when corn contracts weakened. Ben had 1 week where he priced expansion debt again. Lila, now deep in the books herself, started answering them with line items before Bo could speak. 3 days after a tense county meeting in 2014, they sat at the same kitchen table with updated ledgers spread in ordered stacks. Lila read the comparison aloud so nobody could hide behind mood. Accepting Trent's first offer in 2005 would have produced about $850,200 net before family split, roughly $270,000 each after reserves. Holding rights through 2014 had already generated far more cumulative net cash flow while preserving ownership, and the lease rate trend was still climbing under scarcity pressure. Wade signed a new operating plan with hard limits on borrowed seasonal exposure. Ben committed to a cash-only equipment rule for 5 years. Bo did not smile. He nodded once, entered the date, and kept his pen. Outside, the old Ford sat in the same spot, with rust along both rocker panels and baling wire still holding the tailgate true. Inside, the arithmetic had become family policy. The county still had families in pain, auctions still posted on bulletin boards, and weather still refused to honor anyone's plan. Yet one argument in one house had moved from pride to proof, and that changed what came next, when the next, much larger offer arrived. The larger offer arrived in a white envelope on a Thursday afternoon, hand-delivered to the co-op office in Hutchinson, while heat warnings were still posted across central Kansas. Lila signed for it, recognized Trent Halverson's firm letterhead, and drove it straight to Bo instead of opening it in the parking lot. He read the first page once, set it on the hood of the old Ford, and asked her to call Wade and Ben to the kitchen table by sundown. Offer amount: $3,800,000 for permanent transfer of the Ramsey package and associated priority positions, closing window 60 days, expedited review support already drafted. Trent had added one line in his own handwriting at the bottom. This is the last premium cycle you will see. Bo did not argue with the page. He countered with structure. By the following Tuesday, he had filed articles for the Ramsey Water Cooperative with 7 participating holders across Cloud County and Reno County, each retaining title while pooling negotiating authority for interruptible municipal leasing. The board hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later in Concordia, and Trent reserved 2 speaking slots and arrived with a consultant, a slide deck, and color printouts showing one-time liquidity under permanent transfer. Bo arrived in the 1994 Ford with rust still visible under the doors and a legal folder tied with twine. Trent wore a pressed jacket in late summer heat and looked, to anyone walking in cold, like the serious man in the serious deal. Bo looked like he had come to pick up feed. The hearing room changed its mind when numbers moved from proposal to verification. County Council asked each side for proof of capacity. Trent presented valuation comps and transfer precedent. Lila stood for the cooperative and handed up audited statements prepared by a Wichita accounting firm that had reviewed 15 years of ledgers, lease contracts, meter records, and tax filings. The chair read the top-line figures into the microphone so the room could hear them clearly. Ramsey family land value, at current county averages, $3,136,000. Independently appraised water rights value, $5,400,000. Liquid reserves across operating and reserve accounts, $4,200,000. Long-term debt, 0. Total family net worth, approximately $12,736,000 before minor liabilities. No one gasped theatrically. It was quieter than that. Pens stopped moving. Two people in the back row leaned forward as if they had misheard the number and wanted to hear it again. Then Lila entered the cooperative contracts. Rotating 5-year interruptible leases at $690 per acre-foot, 4% annual escalator, baseline committed volume, and drought priority contingencies already negotiated. Contracted value over 5 years for pooled participating volume, $4,060,944, with ownership retained and renewal options preserved. She laid the page beside Trent's transfer model and let the arithmetic make the argument. Permanent sale would pay once and remove control forever. Lease-first policy paid repeatedly, protected local farm continuity, and preserved municipal flexibility during peak drought years. Trent took his turn and called ownership retention sentimental and non-bankable. The board chair asked one question in reply. If non-bankable means no debt was needed, what exactly was the defect? The vote was not dramatic. It was procedural and final. Approval carried on a 6-1 margin. Trent closed his presentation folder, thanked the board in a controlled voice, and left without stopping in the hallway. Outside, Wade watched him walk past the Ford without looking at it. For 20 years, that truck had been evidence used against Bo. That afternoon, it became a visual joke everyone understood at once, dry and almost gentle in its irony. The poorest-looking man in the lot had just demonstrated the strongest balance sheet in the county room. If you are learning something from this, pass it to one person who thinks debt equals progress, because this is where philosophy turns into outcomes for other families. Bo started the generosity phase the same way he handled leases, with written terms and no speeches. He opened a new ledger labeled Circulation Fund and set 3 rules on page 1. First, no emergency loan above 0 interest unless the recipient completed a cash flow plan with Lila. Second, every funded recipient had to attend quarterly bookkeeping sessions for 2 years. Third, once stable, each recipient would mentor one newer operator at no charge. The first transfer was family, because order matters. Wade still had seasonal carry exposure, and one equipment bridge note totaling $436,000 at blended 8.2% after a bad input year. Ben had accumulated $764,000 across livestock infrastructure and feed cycle borrowing. At blended 8.6% during expansion timing, he had sworn he would avoid, but eventually accepted under market pressure. Bo wired $1,200,000 to clear both sets completely. Annual interest burden removed from the family system, roughly $100,000 in ordinary years. Lila declined a debt payoff and asked for equity instead. She had drafted a plan for a seed cleaning and storage facility near Hutchinson that could serve smaller growers who were paying steep third-party cleaning rates and losing margin on transportation delays. Project cost came to $1,480,000, land and site prep $220,000, building shell $610,000, cleaning line and conveyors $460,000, utilities and compliance $96,000, opening operating reserve $94,000. Bo provided $620,000 as equity. Wade and Ben invested $80,000 each, and Lila secured the remaining $700,000 through a local partnership note she structured to amortize over 7 years with conservative throughput assumptions. By year 3, the facility was clearing enough net operating income to cover debt service and build reserve, and by year 6, the note was retired early. It now processes seed for 41 regional operations at rates below outside contractors, keeping value inside the same counties that had once treated bookkeeping as secondary work. The largest step was the revolving fund. Bo capitalized it at $2 million with 0 interest terms, administered through the cooperative rather than the family directly to avoid personality lending and preserve consistent standards. Maximum ticket size was $120,000. Minimum $15,000. Repayment period 3 to 7 years. Collateral flexible but documented, with mandatory monthly reporting in year 1. Ethan Mull was approved for $85,000 in the first cycle to reopen as a cooperative repair and fabrication shop after foreclosure had ended his farm operation. He used $42,000 for machine tools, $18,000 for a service truck with 196,000 miles, $11,000 for leasehold upgrades, and the balance for working capital. Within 18 months, he had 7 county accounts and 2 apprentices. By year 4, he had repaid the loan in full and was operating cash positive, and the shop now handles off-season rebuilds that reduce equipment replacement pressure for dozens of farms. Carla Dorsey entered the fund in year 2, after Jim passed in 2022 and left her with grief, paperwork, and no appetite for predatory bridge terms. She took a $60,000 stabilization line, used $24,000 for tax and legal cleanup, $21,000 for irrigation repairs on retained parcels, and $15,000 to bridge operating costs while renegotiating leases. Lila then structured a separate cooperative agreement that allowed Carla's daughter, Naomi Dorsey, to lease back 160 acres at cost-based terms instead of speculative market rates, preserving the family's agricultural position while rebuilding slowly. Carla now runs cooperative bookkeeping 3 days a week and closes more clean monthly books than most operations twice her size. Miguel Herrera came in with the clearest policy shift. He requested $110,000 and submitted 2 scenarios, one with financed newer equipment and one with used cash purchases, plus staged repairs. Under his old pattern, projected annual carrying cost exceeded $38,000 before fuel. Under the cooperative model, he bought a used combine, tractor, and grain cart package for $94,500 cash, allocated $12,800 for repairs, and kept a $2,700 reserve for contingencies. He repaid the fund in 48 months and has not carried variable rate equipment debt since. Last season, he grossed less than the biggest operators near him and still kept more after obligations, because there were fewer obligations. 3 younger recipients followed with smaller tickets that proved the multiplier effect Bo had always pointed toward without naming. Taryn Ellis received $48,000 for irrigation conversion and paid it back in 36 months while raising per acre margin enough to hire 1 full-time employee. Caleb Rios used $32,000 to replace high-cost short-term operating credit and now mentors first-year borrowers on cash flow tracking. Hannah Pike took $27,000 for a used planter and repair package, avoided a dealer note above 9%, and now farms debt-light on acreage her parents had nearly leased out under pressure. By the end of the fund's 3rd full year, $1,562,000 had been deployed across 14 borrowers. Repayment performance sat above 96% on schedule, and recycled principal had already financed second-cycle loans without adding new capital. The deeper examination came in another ledger night, this time with more people at the table and fewer arguments. Bo asked Lila to read the long sequence from 2015 forward so everyone could see continuity between the 2005 refusal and the 2025 outcome. 2015, 318 acre-feet leased at $428, gross $136,104, net $111,900. 2016, 324 at $446, gross $144,504, net $118,600. 2017, 331 at $462, gross $152,922, net $125,100. 2018, 336 at $488, gross $163,968, net $134,300. 2019, 342 at $515, gross $176,130, net $144,200. 2020, 330 at $540, gross $178,200, net $145,700. 2021, 338 at $566, gross $191,308, net $156,800. 2022, 344 at $592, gross $203,648, net $166,900. 20 to 23, 347 at $620, gross $215,140, net $176,400. 20 to 24, 340 at $650, gross $221,000, net $181,600. Pre-cooperative decade net total $1,461,500. Then she added the cooperative contracts approved in 2025. Baseline annual value built on $690 per acre foot with a 4% escalator. 5-year contracted total $4,060,944 across pooled commitments. Ownership preserved. Counterfactual was recalculated with current tax assumptions and family splits. If Bo had accepted $1,200,000 in 2005, net distributable value after taxes and transaction costs would still have landed near $850,200, around $270,000 per child once and finished. Actual realized and contracted family cash flow. Benefit from holding rights through 2025, net of maintenance and legal costs, now exceeded $6,400,000, with underlying assets still held and appraised near $5,400,000. One decision, two paths, difference measured, not imagined. The recipient trajectories were added as a final arithmetic layer. Funded recoveries and growth projects had supported acreage retention, service jobs, and lower interest operating behavior across the local network. Conservative aggregate estimate from cooperative records showed direct support touching 3,420 acres under debt-light management and preserving or creating 29 full-time equivalent jobs when shop, facility, and farm labor were counted together. The original $2 million fund principle was still intact in revolving form because repayments replenished capacity. This was Bo's entire thesis in spreadsheet shape. Ownership first, debt last, margin protected, then generosity scaled. When the room emptied, he stayed behind long enough to write one more policy line under the inheritance tab. Each grandchild would save the first $10,000 personally before trust distributions began. not as punishment, as calibration. Wade initialed it. Ben initialed it. Lila filed it with the Cooperative Council packet. Outside, the same Ford waited under the yard light, rust unchanged, value misunderstood by strangers, and no longer misunderstood by the family that would have to carry the rule. Lila stood by the sink for a moment after Bo walked out to the truck, then pulled the circulation fund ledger back toward the center of the table and reopened it to the borrower pages. She did not make a speech. She sharpened 2 pencils, checked the next month's reporting dates, and wrote 3 reminders in the margin for the morning: Ethan inventory audit, Carla lease ledger reconciliation, Miguel depreciation schedule update. Bo came back in long enough to set his reading glasses beside her hand and say, "Keep it clean on paper." She nodded once. That was the entire handoff. By late October 2025, the cooperative office had become the busiest room in the old annex building in Concordia, with folding chairs along one wall and a coffee pot that never stayed full past 9 in the morning. Borrowers came in with bank statements, feed invoices, payroll sheets, and uncertainty. They left with cash flow calendars, required savings targets, and terms that did not punish them for one bad weather week. Ethan Mull arrived first most Mondays, usually with grease on his sleeves from the repair shop and a parts list folded into his shirt pocket. His $85,000 restart loan had already been repaid, but he kept coming because Bo's rule was clear. Once you stand up again, you hold someone else steady. Ethan took that obligation seriously. In 2026, he set a cooperative repair rate that was 18% below regional dealer labor for standardized rebuilds, then posted the rate sheet publicly so no one had to negotiate from desperation. 12 farms used the shop that winter. By the end of 2027, 31 did. His gross revenue moved from $212,000 in year 1 to $468,000 in year 3. And net margins stayed modest because he refused price spikes during drought months. He hired 2 apprentices, then a third, all paid hourly with training benchmarks, tied to certification and not to family name. That shop now saves local operators an estimated $294,000 annually in avoided emergency replacement costs, according to Lila's conservative tally from submitted invoices. Ethan no longer farmed his old 1,120 acres, but he did something nearly as valuable for the same community. He kept other people from losing theirs. 3 months after the first cycle review, Carla Dorsey reorganized the cooperative books into a monthly packet that even the most number-averse operators could follow. Green pages for cash in, yellow pages for fixed obligations, red pages for risk triggers. Her $60,000 stabilization line was fully repaid on schedule, and she never missed a reporting deadline. In 2026, she moved from borrower to paid cooperative bookkeeper at $52,000 annual salary plus health coverage. She accepted without ceremony and brought cookies to the first board meeting after the vote. Naomi Dorsey, her daughter, used the cost-based lease structure to keep 160 acres productive, then exercised a staged purchase option on the first 40-acre segment at $1,900 per acre, below speculative market but above cooperative basis, exactly as drafted. She made every payment from operating margin and custom work, no balloon debt, no hidden guarantor. The land that had looked gone stayed in the family line through patient paper, not luck. Miguel Herrera changed his operating culture so completely that younger farmers started asking him to teach the equipment module at quarterly sessions. He still ran used machinery, but now every purchase started with a handwritten total cost of ownership line that included repair reserve, fuel sensitivity, and 3 commodity price scenarios. In 2026, he replaced one aging tractor with a cash purchase at $38,500 and budgeted $4,200 for immediate corrective work, then compared that to a financed alternative quoted at $126,000 over term, with interest and dealer package fees. He taped both totals above his desk for 6 months. His farm net, after all obligations, improved from $74,000 to $146,000 over 2 seasons, not because yields exploded, but because fixed costs stopped eating recovery years. He repaid his $110,000 cooperative loan in full, then contributed $15,000 to the revolving pool as a voluntary subordinated reserve from his own retained earnings. He called it tuition paid back. By the first week of March 2026, the smaller ticket borrowers were producing the kind of results that never make headlines and still change a county. Taryn Ellis completed irrigation conversion with her $48,000 loan and lifted average margin per acre, enough to hire 1 full-time employee and 1 seasonal driver. Caleb Rios used $32,000 to break dependency on high-cost, short-term credit, then built a rolling 13-week cash forecast template that the cooperative now gives to every first-year applicant. Hannah Pike's $27,000 planter and repair package kept her from signing a note near 10%, and she now farms debt-light on acreage her parents had nearly leased out under pressure. Across 14 original borrowers and 6 second cycle recipients, the $2 million revolving fund maintained 95.8% on-time performance, carried 0 interest by design, and kept principal capacity intact through repayments. Aggregate effect by verified cooperative records: 3,970 acres under debt-light management, 34 full-time equivalent jobs retained or created, and a measurable drop in forced equipment liquidations at local consignment yards. Trent Halverson's resolution was less dramatic than people expected and more definitive than rumor allowed. He stayed in the region through 1 more contract season, pursuing transfer packages that had worked for him for years. But the board approval in Concordia changed the baseline. Cloud County and Reno County operators who once listened quietly now asked for interruptible lease comparables, escalator terms, and ownership retention clauses before they discussed any permanent transfer. Municipal buyers, seeing the cooperative performance data, began preferring flexible lease structures that protected supply without triggering political backlash over permanent rural asset loss. Trent's strongest tool had always been urgency. Bo's model replaced urgency with audited alternatives. By summer 2027, Trent's firm closed its Hutchinson office and consolidated operations out of region. He did not declare defeat publicly. He issued a formal notice to clients citing strategic realignment and changing market conditions. At a retirement dinner for a longtime county extension accountant, he stood near the back wall, watched Lila present cooperative metrics to a room that used to dismiss her father's truck, and told one former colleague in a quiet voice, "They made leasing bankable by making it boring." That was as close as he came to an admission, and it was enough. He moved into advisory work on compliance and valuation, where his technical skill still mattered, just aimed at a different paradigm. He was not ruined, he was rerouted. The roll call that followed was recorded the same way Bo preferred all important things recorded: names, numbers, dates, and current status, no ornament. Wade Ramsey now manages field operations across family acreage with capped seasonal borrowing rules that require projected debt service, below 12% of conservative gross, signed by him and reviewed by Lila each quarter. He carries no long-term operating debt. Ben Ramsey runs livestock and feed planning with a cash-first equipment replacement schedule and a minimum 6-month feed reserve target, documented monthly. He carries no variable rate equipment debt and has not for years. Lila Ramsey operates the seed cleaning facility near Hutchinson, serves as cooperative financial officer, and still does line item review with borrowers who arrive defensive and leave relieved. Her partnership note was retired early. The facility now serves 41 operations and posts stable margins. Bo Ramsey remains in the same farmhouse with the same patched work coats hanging by the back door. He still drives the 1994 Ford F-250, now past 347,000 miles, rust expanded but frame sound, tailgate still held straight by refreshed baling wire when the old strand gave out. The International Harvester, 1086, still starts with a little smoke on cold mornings. The John Deere 7720 still runs harvest passes each fall on selected blocks, not because newer options do not exist, but because paid-for utility remains utility. The ledgers are now digitized in parallel by Lila's team, yet Bo keeps writing daily entries by hand first, then letting someone else mirror them. He says the hand slows the mind enough to catch mistakes. Ethan Mull currently owns and manages the Cooperative Repair Shop and sits on the Fund Oversight Committee as the member most likely to reject optimistic projections. Carla Dorsey currently runs bookkeeping operations for the cooperative and still brings hard copy backups to every audit review, even though the system is digital. Naomi Dorsey currently leases and owns portions of her family ground under staged terms and mentors 2 younger operators on lease literacy. Miguel Herrera currently farms with used cash purchase equipment and teaches the quarterly equipment cost module. Taryn Ellis currently runs a larger irrigated footprint with 1 full-time employee. Caleb Rios currently mentors first-year borrowers on cash discipline. Hannah Pike currently farms debt-light acreage with her parents, no longer forced toward distress leasing. Jim Dorsey remains where he was named in the records, passed in 2022, remembered without reduction to a cautionary line item. His name stays on the cooperative memorial page and on one of Naomi's field maps. By harvest 2028, the conditional inheritance policy had its first practical test. Bo's oldest grandchild completed the required $10,000 personal savings threshold through wages, custom hauling, and disciplined budgeting, then received the first trust distribution, exactly as written. No exceptions were requested. None were granted. The rule stood because it was never about gatekeeping money. It was about proving that stewardship begins before transfer. If you want more stories where arithmetic, character, and quiet decisions outlast noise, subscribe now and stay with this channel. Then leave a comment answering one specific question. What fixed cost in your own operation or household has the highest hidden long-term price? Then share this with one person who looks at a worn truck, patched clothes, or old equipment and assumes they are looking at failure. The thesis that carried this family through drought, pressure, and persuasion ended where it started, only cleaner in the evidence. Appearance never balanced the ledger. Debt never cared about pride. Ownership, patience, and low fixed costs created room to think when others had to react. The man who looked poorest at the elevator protected the most valuable asset in 4 counties, kept it in local hands, and turned private security into shared resilience without ever needing to boast. Near sunset, Bo parked the old Ford beside the machine shed, shut the door with that familiar shoulder push, and walked inside to write one more date in the ledger. He wrote one more date in the ledger, underlined it once, and slid the book toward Lila without looking up. She read the line, then read the note below it out loud so Wade and Ben could hear from the doorway. Annual verification day. Bring every borrower file. Close every open loop. Bo tapped the page with the pencil eraser. No loose paper this year. The folded 2005 offer sheet, the 2025 white envelope bid, Trent's strategic realignment notice, the board approval minutes, and every lease escalator table came out of 3 different drawers and went into a single fireproof box, indexed by date and signed by Lila. The mason jar of bolts that had held down the first offer page was emptied onto the table, counted and split. Half went to Ethan's shop for inventory. Half stayed in the kitchen as paper weights, because Bo said memory needed weight. By the first Monday of January 2029, the cooperative held its annual borrower review in the old Concordia Annex with all 14 original recipients and 6 second-cycle borrowers present in person. No one dressed for show. Coffee, work coats, seed caps, mud on boots near the back row. Lila called names and verified line items against printed packets and the digital mirror files she had built from Bo's handwritten ledgers. Ethan stood first and presented his repair shop numbers with a mechanic's blunt clarity. Gross revenue for the prior year, $512,400. Net after payroll, parts, utilities, and tax, $96,200. Emergency field call surcharge reduced from 22% above standard rate to 10% because he no longer needed to service debt. Apprentices now 4. Cooperative members receiving winter inspection discounts, 38. He placed a rusted pump impeller on the front table and said, "This came off a unit that would have pushed a family into a replacement note. We rebuilt it for $1,860. Bo nodded once from the side wall. Carla followed with the bookkeeping packet. On-time reporting compliance across the fund had reached 97.2%. Average borrower liquidity reserve increased from 0.9 months of operating expenses at entry to 3.4 months at year-end. Forced liquidation events in participating operations for that year, 0. She paused at Jim's memorial line in the cooperative annual report, touched the page, and continued without breaking cadence. Naomi then presented her own acreage map on poster board, colored by lease status and owned parcels. She had completed payment on a second 40-acre segment at $2,050 per acre under the staged terms, all from retained farm earnings and custom planting income. No balloon, no emergency refinance, no family bailout. When she finished, Bo asked one question. "Water paper still attached?" Naomi answered in 3 words. "Every acre. Yes." Miguel brought 2 spreadsheets and 1 grease-stained notebook. Spreadsheet 1 showed his old debt pattern from before bankruptcy, including monthly carrying costs that had once crossed $4,000 on single equipment lines. Spreadsheet 2 showed current operations with cash purchases, repair reserves, and stress-tested commodity assumptions. He turned the notebook so younger borrowers could see the first page. Every equipment idea started with 3 totals: purchase, repairs, and worst year carrying cost. "If I cannot survive the worst year line, I do not buy," he said. His current net after obligations had held above $150,000 for 2 consecutive seasons, not because weather had turned generous, but because fixed cost pressure was lower. Caleb asked for a copy of the notebook template for new applicants. Miguel handed him the original. Taryn and Hannah gave shorter reports, and both hit the same point from different angles. Taryn's irrigation conversion had raised margin consistency enough to keep one full-time employee year-round and add health coverage in the second year. Hannah's used planter package, bought without a dealer note, had preserved her family acreage through two tight commodity cycles where interest expense would have consumed recovery. Caleb closed the borrower segment with a cash flow dashboard now used by every first-year applicant. 13-week forecast, red line triggers, and required action steps if working capital dropped below threshold. The room was quiet while he spoke because everyone knew how many families had lost ground for lack of that single page. At noon, Lila read the multiplier totals into the minutes for legal record. Revolving fund principal, seeded at $2 million, remained intact in circulation. Cumulative loans disbursed since inception, $3,486,000 across initial and recycled principal. On-time repayment performance, 96.4%. Acres under debt-light management touched by direct lending and required coaching, 4,180. Full-time equivalent jobs retained or created through farms, shop, and processing facility, 37. Estimated annual interest expense avoided versus conventional borrowing paths, $428,000. Bo did not clap. He capped his pen and wrote a single margin note beside the totals. Ownership kept local. 3 weeks later, Trent Halverson drove back into Concordia in a clean pickup with no dealer plates for the first time anyone could remember. He requested 15 minutes at the cooperative office and sat across from Lila and Bo with a thin folder and no slide deck. He had come to finalize 2 administrative threads his firm still held from earlier transfer solicitations, including a dormant option draft that had never been executed, and a consultation invoice that his own office had sent by mistake during consolidation. Lila placed both documents beside the 2005 and 2025 declined offers and asked what he wanted entered in the permanent archive. Trent studied the stack, looked at Bo's patched coat on the chair back, then answered carefully. Mark both as withdrawn. No fee due. He signed the withdrawal form, signed a statement relinquishing any outstanding brokerage claim on Ramsey rights, and slid his business card across the table. Bo pushed the card back. No need. Trent gave a brief nod that carried more honesty than his old confidence ever had. At the door he stopped. Not dramatic, just tired, and finished the sentence he had left hanging at that retirement dinner. I thought urgency was service. I was wrong about that here. He left with his folder closed. The cooperative retained a copy of every signed withdrawal page, and Lila logged the call record from his assistant, confirming file closure at 3:42 in the afternoon. External contact resolved. No appeal filed, no new bid submitted. By harvest of 2030, the roll call had become a yearly ritual read at the same kitchen table where the first offer page once sat under bolts. Wade still managed field operations and had maintained his debt service cap rule without exception. Ben still ran livestock with a 6-month feed reserve and had shifted replacement timing to post-harvest cash windows. Lila still ran the seed cleaning facility, now serving 48 operations, and had moved half the cooperative record system to secure digital backup while keeping Bo's handwritten originals indexed in fireproof storage. Ethan still operated the repair shop and had promoted one apprentice to lead technician. Carla still managed cooperative books and had trained 2 part-time clerks from borrower families. Naomi still expanded acreage through staged purchases and now mentored lease literacy classes each spring. Miguel still taught equipment cost sessions and still brought the same notebook. Taryn still employed one full-time and one seasonal worker. Caleb still coached first-year borrowers. Hannah still farmed debt light with her parents, no longer discussing distress leases at the dinner table. Jim Dorsey remained on the memorial page, named with respect each year, never reduced to a statistic. Bo turned 85 that winter. He did not stop farming, but he narrowed his daily rounds and let Wade and Ben carry more of the physical load. The 1994 Ford crossed 361,000 miles and kept running after Ethan, replaced brake lines and rebuilt the steering column for parts cost and one pie from Carla. The International Harvester, 1086, still started on cold mornings with a brief cloud and settled into steady work by the second minute. The John Deere 7720 still cut selected acres each fall, not out of romance, but because it remained paid for and functional. The baling wire on the tailgate was replaced again, same method, cleaner twist. Strange to strangers, ordinary to them. On a clear evening near the end of October 2031, Bo called all 3 children and 5 grandchildren to the machine shed, handed each grandchild a plain envelope, and read the inheritance condition one more time from the ledger page everyone already knew. Save your first $10,000 personally. Then distributions begin. 1 grandchild had already done it. 2 were close. 2 were just starting summer work and asked practical questions about where to hold savings and how to track it. Lila answered with forms. Wade answered with chores. Ben answered with pickup times. Bo answered with one line. Stewardship starts before transfer. When the light thinned to amber, he walked back to the house slower than he once did, set his glasses beside the ledger, and wrote the date with steady pressure. No applause, no ceremony, no final lecture. Outside, the old Ford sat under dust and rust beside equipment that had outlived predictions. Inside, the books balanced across decades because one family kept distinguishing appearance from structure. They sold hay, they sold calves, they sold land once, carefully, when it improved the whole. They never sold the water. The lesson endured in contracts, in acreage, in jobs, in repaired machines, in paid notes, in children who could read a balance sheet before they signed anything, and in a man who looked poor at the elevator while building wealth that could keep other people standing.